In this episode, I take a trip down memory lane, and in the Empty Compartment this week, I'm joined by podcaster Jeremy Bryant to talk all things 90s and noughties.
This is 90s and Noughties UK, a podcast on UK pop culture of the 90s and 2000s. If you want to contact the show, email 90sandnaughties@gmail.com, tweet us on @90sandnaughtiesuk on Twitter, or check us out on Facebook, 90s and Noughties UK.
Have you ever been in a situation where suddenly you will remember something that happened years and years ago that you had completely forgotten about? That happened to me recently because I was asked about something and I answered, and then I went off the phone with them, and then they rang me again. And I'd remembered this story from years ago, and I'm about to tell you this. Okay, so when I was 10 or 11, I played in a football tournament for my school. And this was in Brighton and Hove. I say Brighton and Hove because I have no idea exactly where it was. It was in that area. And I played in this tournament. Wasn't very good, to be honest. I wasn't really a footballer. It was one of those situations where they're like just making up the numbers, I think. And at the end of the day, there were some footballers who had come, a couple of footballers from Brighton and Hove Albion, who were the local team, obviously. Now, they said, Jamie, do you want to go and get something signed? No. You know, I'm like 10 or 11 at this point. Who are they? I have no idea. I'm not really a football fan. I said I supported Liverpool. I kind of did until Michael Owen left them. But, you know, I wasn't bothered. I was like, no, at this point, Brighton are in like Division 1 or Division 2, as it was then. Doesn't matter, you know? And a couple of these footballers were up there signing things. One of them was somebody Rogers and, I don't know, Bobby somebody, right? So, have you got it yet? I'm sure you will by the end. So, I went home. I watched the news. And I think I was eating my dinner at the same time, watching the local news. And then they said Brighton and Hove Albion, and my ears perked up and I watched, and they were talking about Bobby Zamora. And it was then I realized, wait a minute, Bobby Zamora was one of the people that was at that thing. And he was like this wonder kid who was scoring loads of goals. I think I looked the other day, he scored like 70 goals in 100 appearances or something for Brighton and Hove Albion. And my heart sank a little bit. I mean, I think actually I put on a front. I was like, yeah, whatever, because, you know, I'm 11. But my heart sank a bit because I thought I had a chance to meet Bobby Zamora and I missed out on it. And I think to this day, I still think about that. Obviously not very often because I completely forgot about it. But you know, hopefully you enjoyed it. It's not much of a story, so I do apologize. So let's move on from that unfortunate thing. Have you ever met a footballer? Let me know on social media. So welcome back once again to the Empty Compartment. I'm joined by Jeremy Bryant. Hi, Jeremy. Welcome to the podcast. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I am a multi-podcaster, as you know, and I do a show called Paranormal New Normal. I do a show called Maniacal Music Musings. I do a show called Global Strangeness, which actually airs tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern. And I'm on a show called Bracket Bastards, where we break down a lot of 90s and naughty things. So, and you could take that naughty and put it in either way it's spelled. So there you go.
Well, it sounds like you're perfect for this to discuss this. Normally, what I do just to keep you on your toes, Jeremy. Normally, what I do here is I ask you, the guest, to pose the first question or subject.
All right, I got this. Got to go with my paranormal side here and ask, what was your favorite urban legend that came about in the 90s because of Satanic Panic?
Oh, that's a really loaded one. Do you have a particular thought in mind when you think that?
I mean, there are multiple urban legends that started in the 90s. I mean, Bloody Mary got big in the 90s. Hook hand on the door, like the hitchhiker and the vanishing hitchhiker got big in the 90s. The hot flashing of high beams, guy in the back, killer in the back seat, like urban legend became huge. Like they did a whole movie based around 90s urban legends. So, I mean, even Candyman is from the 90s somewhat.
Wow. I have to admit, I'm not as up on urban legends as you are, but I can't think of any. I really can't think of any, but it sounds like you've got enough for both of us.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, you're from the UK, right?
Yeah.
There's a UK one actually in the 90s that you might have heard of.
Right.
It's called the Baby Train urban legend, and it's believed that because there's one town in the UK that train passes by every night at 2-3 in the morning, and because of that, the legend is that would wake up all the adults in that area, and they had nothing else to do because since they couldn't go back to sleep, so they would make babies. And so that town is constantly pumping out babies because of that, supposedly that urban legend. I mean, whether it's true or not, who knows? But
I mean, where do these things come from? Who starts them?
I feel like bored people at a bar, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. It does sound like something where, like you say, you're stood at a bar or a pub in the case of the UK, and
Yes.
People just kind of spitball stories to, I don't know, to entertain themselves or things that they've heard.
It's either that or it's the other classification where parents are making up stuff to scare their kids so the kids listen. Like that's where Bloody Mary came from. That's where all like the boogeyman type ones came from, was because of the hooked hand urban legend came from parents not wanting their kids to go to make out point and sit in the car and get pregnant. So, I mean, a lot of these urban legends were started off as warnings and more than anything else. So,
and I think as well, I mean, the only thing that comes to mind is, I don't know whether they have this in the US, but when people when I was a kid, people used to make funny faces, and an adult somewhere would say, if the wind changes, your face is going to stay like that.
See, over here they just say if you keep making your face like that, it's going to stick like that. Like they don't have the wind part. We're lazy in America. They just say you keep making that face, it's going to stick like that. So we made it lazier because that's what Americans do.
I mean, it sounds like there are a lot of urban legends. Do you think the idea of the urban legend has kind of died out a bit with the advent of social media, or do you think
not so much because of Reddit creepypastas on Reddit grow on a daily basis. The stories get more in depth. It's just Reddit has kept a lot of these. Reddit has turned urban legends into creepypasta, which is where Slender Man came from, which is where a lot of these creatures have come from nowadays. I think it grew. It gave people more ability to talk back and forth and expand on the story.
How far is it between an urban legend and a conspiracy?
Conspiracies have to have some modulum of truth in them. Like they'd have some little bit of truth in them that could, like, oh, the government has secret societies. Okay, I can believe that to some degree. Can I believe if I go in a mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times, that's going to happen? No, I can't believe that, because unless your house is already haunted and it's another spirit, there's no such thing as really Bloody Mary. I mean, I never heard any stories of that actually happening. Just people saying it did because they wanted to scare each other in high school or whatnot.
So let's move on to the next question, away from urban legends. But I'm going to ask you, Jeremy, what's the worst movie of the 90s that you've ever seen?
Is Princess Bride 90s?
I mean, that's early 2000s. I mean, we're still within the thing. Yeah, 90s and early 2000s.
Uh,
Wait a minute. I'm thinking of Princess Diaries. Apologies.
You are. I was gonna say. I'm like. I know Princess Bride wasn't in the 2000s. I can't remember if it's 90s or 80s.
80s.
Okay. Worst movie in the 90s then. Fight Club.
Really? Why?
It's not a bad movie. I mean, it's a decent movie, but it hypes male aggression too much. That's what it is. It hypes male aggression that we all are just mindless people who need to go beat the shit out of each other in order to ease our stress. Like I think it brings down the male race as a whole.
And do you think that, society has changed a lot since that movie came out?
Oh, God, yeah. It has. So, I mean, and yeah, society is more open to men's mental health now than ever, but it's still got a long way to go. And the Fight Club is still one of the most popular movies out there to most people. So I think people are still in that mentality somewhat, at least in some parts of the United States, at least. I don't know about the UK, but I've met a few Britons in my time podcasting that I can see them picking a fight pretty easy.
And do you think, does Fight Club represent that?
I think it just represents that raw male energy that makes us all look like we're mindless apes and we just want to fight each other rather than actually talk things out like civilized gentlemen, which a lot of us do nowadays. But Fight Club I think, is a bad stereotype of men. I just think that's my beef with it, really. The storyline's not bad, but it's just and who doesn't like seeing meatloaf with tits? But I mean, it's just a bad story. It's a bad image for men, I think.
I mean, I'll be the first to admit I haven't seen it. I mean, is this one of those films that I'll watch it and I'll be horrified?
No. Fight Club is not horror at all. It's a thriller, if anything. It's a thriller. It's an action movie, kind of. But I mean, it's a twist. The twist at the end, if you haven't seen it, is if you haven't heard of the twist already by this point, which pretty much already has. But the twist at the end is kind of like the part that, like, if you don't know about it, it's just like going to have you spiraling.
Cool.
But I don't like the theme. That's just the problem with it.
I mean, the only thing I know about Fight Club is we don't talk about Fight Club.
Yeah, well, I broke that rule, but I'm not in the Fight Club, so that's okay.
Well, I mean, that concise answer there. Let's move on to the third question, which comes from a listener. You know who you are. And I ask you, Jeremy, you are a multi-podcaster. If podcasting existed in the 90s, and it probably did at some point, but if it existed in the mass way it does now, what niche do you think would have existed in podcast form based on trends?
Well, I mean, podcasting did exist in the 90s. It was called radio, and there was radio shows, and that's basically what podcasting was in the 90s. They did interviews. I mean, Art Bell was one of the most popular radio hosts in the 90s in America, especially because he talked everything, like from paranormal to just day-to-day stuff. He talked everything, but he did love the paranormal to a degree. So he talked to a lot of alien abductees, and he talked to a lot of people who have seen Bigfoot. Like he was a paranormal legend, basically. But I mean, he talked about everything. He would talk about music and movies and all that. So Coast to Coast with Art Bell. I mean, that was podcasting in the 90s. But I think if podcasting existed the way it does now in the 90s, which never would have happened because of the internet capability back then, but if it existed then, boy bands, there'd be a lot more podcasts about boy bands, I think, and a few about girl groups as well. But I mean, a lot about boy bands. I know many podcasters now who love talking about NSYNC and Backstreet Boys to this day. So
I was going to ask any boy bands in particular.
Yeah, I mean, it's America. We're in America, so the top two are always NSYNC and Backstreet Boys to most women in America, and I guess some men. But I mean, you could throw in Boys to Men in there too, even, or you could throw in 98 Degrees, or you could throw in New Kids on the Block. I mean, I'm trying to think of a UK one, but I can't think of one right now.
I'll name some for you. There would have been ones like Boyzone, Westlife, Take That. Those three in particular. There might be some more. I mean, you get into the late 90s, you've got like 5, 911, A1, etc. So yeah, even now, I mean, half of the stuff that I do on this particular podcast is boy band based. It is interesting, but I think in the 90s there would have been a lot more. You are absolutely right. That wasn't what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to go for more fashion.
No, I mean, there'd be a few, but I mean, fashion is always a topic no matter what decade you're in. That's why I didn't go with it. Boy bands have somewhat died out. I mean, they're still around, but they're not nowhere near the hype they had in the 90s. Nowhere near.
No, and I think part of that is because there's not quite so much commercialism as there used to be around that. I think music, it tends to be solo artists these days.
Yeah, I mean, the internet has also made it, just like it made podcasting a thing, it made it easier for music acts to get out there, and a lot of people who would never have made it in the 90s unless because they wouldn't have had agents to get them out there with labels, now they can just put their music on Spotify and gain a following. So it's a different world completely.
Definitely. If somebody hasn't come up with it yet, a 90s podcast actually in the 90s, that would be an interesting thing. There's a bit of a meta thing going on there, but what I mean is a podcast about the 90s as though it's actually happening at that particular moment in time. That would be really interesting.
I actually could make that work, I think. I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, just do like the Goldbergs, pretend it's a day in the 90s and you're just podcasting about the 90s, like throwing commentary in the background about like the new Janko jeans you got that day or something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but back in the day, I used to record a lot of speech onto tape, cassette tape and whatnot. So in some ways, these things did exist. But how I wish I'd gone into a lot more detail. Oh, the things I could have made episodes back there. But there we are. We come to the end of the Empty Compartment. Remind us of your podcasts again, Jeremy.
You can, of course, check out Paranormally Normal. You can check out Maniacal Music Musings. Or you can check out Bracket Bastards. Those three are on Spotify and everywhere else. You can find them on podcatchers. Pretty much every podcatcher out there for most of them. And Global Strangeness you can catch live every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, and so on and so forth. And I guess 4 p.m. 1 in the morning UK time, I think. But
it's around there. It depends on what part of the country you're in.
It's 5 or 6 hours. I know that. But yeah, so I mean, Global Strangeness is live every Sunday night in America at 9 East. So, and other than that, you could just follow me on Facebook as Jeremy Bryant, and you'll see everything I do. Everything I do goes on my page. So,
excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jeremy, for being on the podcast today.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much to Jeremy Bryant for appearing on this edition of The Empty Compartment. The feature will return next week, but for now, it's time to end this episode. But thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you for listening to 90s and Noughties UK, a podcast on UK pop culture of the 90s and 2000s. Please remember to rate, comment and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. If you want to contact the show, email 90sandnaughties@gmail.com, tweet us on @90sandnaughtiesuk on Twitter, or check us out on Facebook, 90s and Noughties UK. This is 90s and Noughties UK, a podcast on UK pop culture of the 90s and 2000s. If you want to contact the show, email 90sandnaughties@gmail.com, tweet us on @90sandnaughtiesuk on Twitter, or check us out on Facebook, 90s and Naughties UK.